What is, by far, the most surreal event to have ever happened in history? The Battle of the Eclipse, also known as the Battle of Ellis, it took place in the early 6th century BC in Anatolia, present-day Turkey. It involved the Medes and the Lydians. The sudden darkness led both parties to halt the fighting and negotiate a peace agreement, ending a 6-year war. The Christmas Truce of 1914, in which soldiers came across the battle lines to sing and play football against each other. Or, more precisely, the way soldiers on both sides went back to fighting when Christmas was over. Napoleon landing with 1,000 men in France and taking back control of the country in 3 weeks without a shot being fired. The Night the Stars Fell, 1833. A meteor shower so intense fell over the southern United States that people thought the world was ending. Slave owners reportedly repented at the feet of their slaves, begging forgiveness for enslaving them. And then the next day, I suppose, went right back to normal. But the even was so memorable that it was used as a touchstone moment that slaves could use to estimate their age for decades. Up until the 1920, people could say I must have been 8 years old the night the stars fell, and thus historians could approximate their birth year. The Great Molasses Flood in Boston in 1919. An enormous storage tank of molasses burst. 21 people were killed and 150 were injured. The Dancing Plague of 1518 is up there. Hard to pinpoint one event, but I would say a candidate could be the Tunguska event of 1908. This incident involved a massive explosion in Siberia, believed to be caused by the airburst of a comet or meteoroid. It flattened an estimated 80 million trees over 2,150 square kilometers, yet incredibly, it caused no confirmed human fatalities. The event's cause remained mysterious for decades, fueling various scientific and fantastical theories, making it a prime candidate for one of the most surreal events in human history due to its scale, mystery, and the dramatic visuals it must have produced. The escalation of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand from a manageable situation to World War I. I'm sure everyone in the region was unable to process it. A Serbian man sticking a bottle up his ass was a major contributing factor to the collapse of Yugoslavia and the subsequent years of war and genocide. Specifically, his blaming it on an attack by a gang of Albanians was a tipping point in allowing pent-up nationalist feelings in Yugoslavia to boil over and subsequently explode. It's two things for me. The fact that there is more time between the first bronze weapons and the first steel weapons than there is between the first steel weapons and nuclear weapons, and that it took us thousands of years to figure out how to fly but less than 100 more to put a man on the moon. There was a battle in World War II where the Germans fought alongside Allied forces against the SS and freed a famous tennis player. The Battle of Kassel Itter. The Nazis had surrendered at this point, but there were some SS forces that were still fighting, so the Nazis, Americans and Australians teamed up against the SS. We landed on the moon, that's pretty surreal to me. 4 Seasons Landscaping. The US faked vampire attacks in Asia. A bunch of weak-ass apes becoming the most dominant species on Earth. The Surrealists had an intervention when one of the founding members of the group wanted to try something different. As they became more famous, the group became more politically active and encouraged each other to create ever more controversial art to shock and offend the common folk. Most of the group were on board because these guys were the rock stars of the era and everybody likes being famous. Except for Alberto Giacometti, he just wanted to make sculptures of human figures, specifically the common folk they were supposed to be offending. So the group, led by Marcel Duchamp, decided to have it out with him and threatened to kick him out of the movement if he didn't straighten up and fly sideways with the rest of them. He told them to kick rocks and went on to create the work he's best known for. TLDR, a group based on pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable art, set boundaries for what was acceptable art for the group. The pace at which we as a human species have been able to harness technology after being hunters and gathering for some 100,000 years. We lived life as savages before modern machinery, toiling with the rocks and mud. The last 200 years or so have been the outlier. The fact that we're able to comprehend abstract things. These 8 people can paint or write. Think about love. Probably the moon landing, or the first manned space flight. The miracle of Dunkirk during World War II is one of those surreal moments in history. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers stranded on the beaches of Dunkirk, surrounded by enemy forces, yet through a remarkable combination of bravery, luck, and sheer determination, a flotilla of civilian boats managed to evacuate over 330,000 soldiers to safety. A solar eclipse totality caused 2 battling armies to stop and make peace because they thought the eclipse was sent as a sign from the heavens telling them to stop. Agriculture. Figuring that out unlocked where we are today. For me, watching the airplanes hit the World Trade Center seemed surreal. Harriet the Tortoise saw both Charles Darwin and Steve Irwin in person. This may be stretching the definition of an event a bit, but the Cambrian explosion. It's the period where evolution was just kinda trying shit out and seeing what happened. The optimal numbers and configurations of limbs, sensory organs, and random appendages hadn't been worked out yet. That fake sign language interpreter at Nelson Mandela's memorial service. The first time a fish said, "Hey, I am walking on land, fuck you." Perhaps that blinding flash coming out of nowhere the citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki witnessed before their cities got destroyed by it an instant later. No one knew what an atom bomb was back then. It must have seemed like the wrath of the gods. The time-space point in which the singularity winked into existence, starting the creation we call the universe. 2 girls formed Singapore, killing Kim Jong-un's brother by accident. Spies from North Korea made them think the whole thing was a YouTube prank video. The build-up to the Battle of Tsushima in 1905 and the battle itself. Russians built up another fleet of warships and had them sail from the Baltic Sea to the waters around Japan because their previous fleet was destroyed by the Japanese military in China. During this voyage, the Russians accidentally fired on civilian boats from multiple European countries, including Britain, and almost started a war between the Brits. Then, after stopping in Africa, they brought multiple animals into their ships, the result being that they became floating zoos afterwards. They even fired on their own ships on a couple of occasions. After all of this, the Russians finally made it to the seas around Japan and they immediately got obliterated by the Japanese fleet shortly thereafter.